What if everything you were taught about ancient civilization was deliberately incomplete? What if there was a city, a real, thriving, sophisticated city, with stone towers, royal palaces, international trade routes, and a population of 18,000 people, and the moment European explorers found it, they looked at each other and said, Africans couldn't have built this. We need to invent someone else. And that is exactly what they did. They fabricated an entire fictional civilization. They wrote it into official reports. They taught it in universities. They printed it in encyclopedias. For over a century, the lie held. But the stones themselves never changed. The walls never moved. And the truth was always there, waiting in the ruins of a city called Great Zimbabwe. Stay with me. Before we go to Zimbabwe, we need to go to Rome. The year is 300 AD. The Roman Empire is at its absolute peak. The Colosseum is standing. The aqueducts are running. The roads stretch from Britain to Mesopotamia. Rome is considered the greatest achievement of human civilization, the gold standard by which all other societies are measured. Now hold that image in your mind. Because on the other side of the world, deep in the interior of southern Africa, something extraordinary is quietly being built. No one in Europe knows it exists. No Roman senator has heard of it. No Greek philosopher has written about it. But in the highlands of what is now Zimbabwe, a civilization is rising, cutting stone, building walls, establishing trade routes, that will outlast Rome itself. Great Zimbabwe is a city of stone. Built between the 11th and 15th centuries by the ancestors of the Shona people, it covers nearly 722 hectares, that is almost 1,800 acres of constructed urban space. At its height, between 10,000 and 18,000 people lived here. The name itself tells you everything. Zimbabwe comes from the Shona words Dzimba Dza Mabwe, meaning houses of stone. And stone is the key word. Because what makes Great Zimbabwe extraordinary, what makes it impossible to dismiss, is the construction. Massive granite walls. Some stretching 11 meters high. 5 meters thick at the base. Built without a single drop of mortar. No cement. No adhesive of any kind. Just precisely cut stone, fitted together with such skill that the walls have stood for over 8 centuries. Let's talk about that engineering for a moment, because it deserves real attention. The builders of Great Zimbabwe quarried granite from the hills surrounding the city. Granite is one of the hardest natural materials on Earth. Cutting it, shaping it, and transporting it requires serious technical knowledge and organized labor. They heated the rock with fire and then rapidly cooled it with water, a technique called thermal quarrying, which caused the granite to fracture along precise natural lines. The resulting blocks were then carefully shaped and stacked using a technique called dry stone walling. No mortar. Just engineering precision. The walls were built with such accuracy that they have survived earthquakes, centuries of rainfall, and the relentless passage of time, standing firm while far newer structures with modern materials have crumbled completely around the world. Great Zimbabwe was not just a pile of impressive walls. It was a fully planned, functional city with distinct zones and purposes. At the top of a granite hill sat the hill complex, the oldest part of the site, likely a royal residence and spiritual center, commanding views of the entire valley below. Below it, in the valley, stood the great enclosure, the largest ancient structure in sub-Saharan Africa. Its outer wall stretches over 250 meters in circumference. Inside that wall is a narrow passage that runs alongside it, so precise, so deliberately constructed, that historians believe it was used for royal ceremonies. And throughout the valley, dozens of smaller stone enclosures housed the population, nobles, merchants, craftspeople, farmers. This was not a camp. This was an organized, hierarchical, functioning city. Here is where Great Zimbabwe stops being impressive and becomes truly extraordinary. This city was not isolated. It was the capital of a global trade empire. Archaeological excavations inside Great Zimbabwe have uncovered objects that no one expected to find in southern Africa. Chinese porcelain from the Song and Ming dynasties, pottery that was being made on the other side of the planet, Persian glassware, Arab coins, Indian glass beads, Syrian pottery. These were not accidental discoveries. These were trade goods, evidence of sustained, organized, long-distance commerce connecting Great Zimbabwe to the Swahili coast ports, to Arab merchants, to Indian Ocean trade routes, and ultimately to China. This city was plugged into the medieval world economy. It was exporting gold and ivory. It was importing luxury goods. It was, by every definition, an international trading capital. The currency of Great Zimbabwe's power was gold. The region surrounding the city sits on some of the richest gold deposits in all of Africa. The Shona people mined it, refined it, and traded it through a network of routes that stretched to the coast. Arab traders at the port of Sofala on the Mozambique coast, one of the most important trading posts on the entire East African seaboard, acted as the middlemen connecting Zimbabwe's gold to the wider world. At its economic height, historians believe the Zimbabwe Plateau was producing a significant portion of the gold circulating in the entire Indian Ocean trade network. This was not a primitive society living off the land. This was a sophisticated economic machine, with a capital city at its center, pulling in global wealth and redistributing it across a vast empire. And here is something that makes the story even deeper. Great Zimbabwe did not appear from nowhere. It was the successor to an even earlier African kingdom, the Kingdom of Mapungubwe, which flourished in what is now South Africa between 900 and 1300 AD. Mapungubwe was the first true kingdom in southern Africa, with a ruling class, a royal hill, a commoner population below, and gold craftsmanship so sophisticated it still shocks archaeologists today. The famous golden rhino of Mapungubwe, a tiny sculpture of a rhinoceros covered in gold foil, was found in a royal grave. It is one of the most beautiful objects ever produced in southern African history. When Mapungubwe declined, its people and its traditions moved north. And Great Zimbabwe rose in its place. This story goes back even further than most people realize. Now we arrive at the moment everything goes wrong. The first Portuguese explorers reached the East African coast in the late 1400s. They heard rumors almost immediately, from Arab traders, from coastal Swahili merchants, of a great stone city in the interior. A city of gold. Portuguese Captain Vicente Peguedu documented the ruins in 1531, describing stone structures of marvelous size built without lime or mortar. He described them as extraordinary. But here is the critical detail: the Portuguese at this point were not trying to deny the city's origins. They simply described what they saw and moved on. The denial, the fabrication, the deliberate erasure, that came later. That came in the 19th century, when European colonial powers arrived with a very specific agenda and found ruins that completely contradicted it. The year is 1871. A German explorer named Karl Mach arrives at the ruins of Great Zimbabwe. He is the first European in the modern era to document the site in detail. And he is immediately faced with a problem. What he sees is undeniable. Massive stone walls. A sophisticated urban layout. Evidence of advanced civilization. But Mach, like almost every European of his era, cannot accept one simple truth: that Africans built this. His solution is immediate and breathtaking in its arrogance. He decides the wood used in the construction smells like cedar. Cedar, he reasons, is from Lebanon. Lebanon was associated with the biblical story of King Solomon. Therefore, and follow this logic, Great Zimbabwe must have been built by the Queen of Sheba, or Phoenicians, or ancient Israelites. Anybody. Anybody except the Africans standing right in front of him. Mwacha's theory spread like wildfire through European academic and colonial circles, because it was exactly what the colonial project needed to hear. By the 1890s, Cecil Rhodes, the British mining magnate who essentially owned southern Africa through his British South Africa Company, had taken control of the region. He renamed it Rhodesia after himself. And the myth of Great Zimbabwe fit perfectly into his agenda. Rhodes funded further exploration of the site specifically to find evidence of a non-African origin. A journalist and amateur archaeologist named Richard Hall was appointed to manage the site. Hall was not a scientist. He was an ideologue. He proceeded to dig up and discard the upper archaeological layers of the site, layers that contained the clearest evidence of Shona habitation, in search of the fictional ancient civilization he had already decided to find. But here is where the story turns. Because not everyone was willing to lie. In 1905, a young British archaeologist named David Randall Mackiver arrived at Great Zimbabwe with actual scientific methods. He studied the pottery. He analyzed the artifacts. He examined the construction techniques. And he published his conclusion clearly and without ambiguity: Great Zimbabwe was built by Africans. Specifically, by the ancestors of the Shona people. His evidence was overwhelming. The pottery matched Shona traditions. The gold working matched local techniques. There was absolutely no evidence of any Middle Eastern or European civilization ever being present. The colonial establishment was furious. Randall Mackiver was attacked, dismissed, and marginalized. His findings were rejected not because the science was wrong, but because the truth was politically inconvenient. The lie was too useful to surrender. 20 years later, in 1929, another archaeologist arrived to settle the question permanently. Her name was Gertrude Cotton Thompson, one of the most respected archaeologists in the world. She was brought in by the British Association specifically because they expected her to find something that supported the non-African origin theory. She did not deliver what they wanted. Her excavations were methodical, exhaustive, and scientifically unimpeachable. She examined every layer of the site. She analyzed every artifact. She studied the construction in forensic detail. And she stood before the British Association and delivered her verdict without any softening: Great Zimbabwe was, unquestionably, an African achievement. Built by African people. Representing African genius. The evidence, she said, was beyond dispute. The room, reportedly, went very quiet. Because now there was no scientific defense left for the lie. And yet, the lie continued. This is perhaps the most disturbing part of the entire story. Even after two separate, rigorous, independent scientific investigations confirmed African origin, the colonial government of Rhodesia kept teaching the myth. Tour guides at the site were officially ordered, to tell visitors that the ruins were not built by local Africans. Museum exhibits maintained the false narrative. Schoolchildren were taught the fabrication. Any archaeologist or academic who insisted on the truth risked losing their position and funding. This was not ignorance. This was not honest confusion. This was a deliberate, state-sanctioned propaganda campaign to deny Africans credit for one of the greatest architectural achievements in the history of the continent. The apartheid-era government of Rhodesia maintained this lie officially until the country became Zimbabwe in 1980. Let's return to the ruins themselves, because the stones have always told the truth, even when humans refuse to. The great enclosure alone required an estimated 15,000 metric tons of granite. Moving that material, shaping it, and assembling it required a workforce of thousands, working over generations, under centralized leadership and technical coordination. Inside the enclosure, archaeologists found a conical tower, solid stone, 11 meters tall, 4 to 6 meters in diameter, with no doors, no windows, no interior. Its purpose is still debated. Was it ceremonial? A symbol of royal power? An astronomical marker? We don't know for certain. But what it tells us is clear: this society had resources to spare for monumental construction that served symbolic rather than purely functional purposes. That is a hallmark of advanced civilization, everywhere in history. Great Zimbabwe did not fall to conquest. It did not burn. It was not destroyed by war or invasion. It declined, and the most likely reason is environmental and economic. By the mid-15th century, the population had grown so large that the land around the city could no longer support it. Deforestation, soil depletion, and the exhaustion of local gold deposits made the original site increasingly unsustainable. The ruling class and population gradually migrated north and west, giving rise to the Kingdom of Mutapa, sometimes called the Munhi-Mutapa Empire, which continued the trade networks and political traditions of Great Zimbabwe for another century. The city wasn't abandoned in crisis. It was outgrown. Its people didn't disappear, they evolved, moved, and built again. The civilization continued. Only the specific site was left behind. When Zimbabwe gained independence in 1980, one of the new government's first acts was deeply symbolic. They named the country after the ruins. Zimbabwe. Houses of stone. In doing so, they were making an unmistakable declaration: this achievement belongs to us. It always belonged to us. Today, Great Zimbabwe is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The official position of every legitimate academic institution and archaeological body in the world is clear and unanimous: it was built by the ancestors of the Shona and Venda people of southern Africa. Ongoing excavations continue to reveal new details about the city's layout, its trade connections, and its people. The lie has been dead for decades in the academic world. But in classrooms, in popular culture, in the general public's knowledge, the erasure still echoes. Which is exactly why this story needs to be told. Here is what Great Zimbabwe truly represents. It represents the fact that African civilization did not need Europe to validate it. It did not need European discovery to exist. It did not need European approval to be brilliant. For centuries, a city of stone stood in southern Africa, trading with China, exporting gold to Arabia, housing 18,000 people, building walls that still stand today, completely unknown to the Western world. And when the Western world finally found it, its first instinct was to steal the credit. But the stones refused. The stones have no ideology. The stones have no colonial agenda. The stones simply stand, the same way they have stood for 800 years, saying the same thing they have always said. We were built by Africans. We are proof of what Africa was. And what Africa has always been.